Bill Jenkins Chevy Vega. Just hearing that name, if you know pro stock, if you know drag racing history, something happens inside you. A little spark. A memory of greatness. The car that dominated an entire era. The car that made grown men protest to NHRA officials. The car that was so fast, so advanced, so perfectly engineered that the sanctioning body had to rewrite their entire rulebook just to slow it down. The Vega became more than a car. It became a legend. But what if I told you there was another car? Not a competitor. Not an imitator. But a twin. A brother from another mother. A car built on the exact same platform with the exact same potential, maybe, just maybe, with even more promise. The Pontiac Astre. You've never heard of it, have you? Oh, maybe you've seen one at a car show. Maybe your neighbor's uncle had one back in the day. Maybe you vaguely remember the name from a magazine article about GM's badge engineering excesses. But as a drag racing legend? As a pro stock icon? Silence. And that's exactly what NHRA wanted. See, this isn't a story about a car that failed. This isn't a story about a bad idea, or poor engineering, or lack of talent. This is a story about a car that was buried before it could prove itself. A car that threatened the wrong people at the wrong time. A car that could have rewritten pro stock history, if anyone had let it. The Pontiac Astre. Bill Jenkins Vega cousin. The car that General Motors built. The car that racers wanted. The car that had everything it needed to become legendary. Except one thing. Permission. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how deep this cover-up goes. You'll understand why some chapters of drag racing history aren't just forgotten, they're actively erased. You'll understand how politics, corporate infighting, and sanctioning body control can kill innovation before it ever sees the light of day. This is the story they didn't want told. But we're telling it anyway. To understand why the Astre matters, why it should matter, we need to go back. Back to the late 1960s when drag racing was changing faster than NHRA could keep up with. You had top fuel cars that were basically rockets on wheels. You had funny cars that looked like production cars but shared exactly 0 parts with anything you could buy. And you had Stock Eliminator, which was supposed to be stock, but had become so modified, so altered, so far from factory specification that the name was basically a joke. NHRA had a problem. The fan base was splitting. Hardcore fans loved the speed, the danger, the engineering madness of top fuel and funny car. But regular people, the folks who might actually buy a car based on what they saw at the track, they couldn't relate anymore. How do you sell cars when your stock class runs 9-second quarter miles with engines that cost more than a house? So in 1970, NHRA created Pro Stock. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity, truly production-based cars, with production bodies, running heads-up on a pro-level purse. Real cars. Real brands. Real competition. The manufacturers loved it. Ford, Chrysler, GM, they all saw the marketing potential immediately. Finally, a class where Sunday's winner actually resembled Monday's showroom car. And for the first 2 years, it worked exactly as planned. Big block Hemis. Big block Chevys. Factory backing. Corporate development programs. Pro Stock became the hottest class in drag racing almost overnight. But then everything changed. Bill Jenkins wasn't like other racers. He didn't have factory backing, at least not at first. He didn't have a massive budget. He didn't have a team of engineers. What he had was a brain that worked differently than everyone else's. While other guys were figuring out how to cram bigger engines into heavier cars, Grumpy was doing math. Weight-to-power ratios. Aerodynamic coefficients. Chassis dynamics. He approached drag racing like a physics problem, not a horsepower contest. And in 1972, he showed up with his answer. A Chevrolet Vega. Now, you have to understand how insane this looked at the time. The Vega was GM's economy car. It was designed to compete with Volkswagens and Toyotas. It had an aluminum 4-cylinder engine that warped if you looked at it wrong. Consumer Reports had literally called it unacceptable. This was not a performance car. This was not a muscle car. This was a penalty box with wheels. But Grumpy saw something nobody else did. He saw the lightest production platform GM made. He saw a 97-inch wheelbase that was perfect for weight transfer. He saw a unibody structure that could be legally modified in ways heavier cars couldn't. Most importantly, he saw NHRA's rulebook loophole. See, Pro Stock rules in 1972 said you had to use a production body. But production had a pretty loose definition. You could acid dip to remove weight. You could tube the chassis. You could move components around for balance. The lighter you started, the lighter you could finish. And the Vega started light. By the time Grumpy was done with it, his Vega weighed barely over 2,000 pounds. It had a 500 cubic inch Chevy big block where the 4-cylinder used to be. It had a chassis that was more race car than grocery getter. And it was completely legal. The first time he ran it competitively, jaws dropped. This little Econobox was running with the big boys. No, scratch that, it was beating the big boys. MS 427s, factory-backed programs with unlimited budgets. None of them could touch the Vega. By 1973, Grumpy Jenkins was the man to beat in pro stock. And his Vega was the car everyone either wanted to copy or wanted banned. NHRA found themselves in an impossible position. The Vega was legal. Grumpy hadn't cheated, he'd just been smarter than everyone else. But the car was making a mockery of pro stock's production car image. So they started changing rules. Weight brakes were adjusted. Body modification rules got stricter. Minimum weights went up. Every change seemed specifically designed to slow down one thing, Grumpy's Vega. But here's what nobody was paying attention to while NHRA and Grumpy were locked in their battle. The Vega wasn't special because it was a Chevrolet. It was special because it was an H-body. And Chevrolet wasn't the only GM division that built H-bodies. In 1975, while the drag racing world was watching Grumpy terrorize pro stock in his Vega, Pontiac Motor Division was watching too. And they were thinking, the Pontiac Astre, badge engineered from the same H-body platform as the Vega. Same wheelbase. Same basic dimensions. Same lightweight construction. On paper, it was a Vega with an arrowhead on the grille. On the drag strip, it never got the chance to prove what it could do. And that wasn't an accident. That was a conspiracy. A corporate conspiracy. A sanctioning body conspiracy. A conspiracy of convenience and cowardice that robbed drag racing fans of what could have been the greatest pro-stock rivalry of the 1970s. Before we expose exactly how deep this goes, before we show you the documents, the decisions, the political maneuvering that killed the Astre before it could race, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button. Tap the bell. Because what we're about to reveal is the kind of story that powerful people worked very hard to bury. We're talking about NHRA politics. GM corporate infighting. $1 million decisions made in back rooms. The kind of story that changes how you see drag racing history. If you love stories about the cars and the characters that the establishment didn't want you to remember, you're in exactly the right place. Now, let's talk about what made the H-body platform so dangerous. And why NHRA was terrified of there being two of them. The H-body technical deep dive. 1967. General Motors is looking at the future and they don't like what they see. Emissions regulations are coming. Federal safety standards are coming. Insurance companies are already starting to strangle the muscle car market. And worst of all, foreign manufacturers, especially the Japanese, are eating Detroit's lunch in the economy car segment. GM needed an answer. They needed a small, efficient, modern car that could compete with imports on price and fuel economy while still being profitable. The answer was the H-body platform. GM engineers started with a clean sheet of paper. 97-inch wheelbase for maneuverability and efficiency. Unibody construction to save weight and manufacturing costs. Simple suspension geometry for easy production and maintenance. It was designed to be GM's weapon in the economy car wars. Chevrolet got it first, introducing the Vega in 1971. The car was immediately controversial. The aluminum engine had issues, build quality was questionable, reliability was poor. But the platform itself? The platform was solid. That unibody construction created a rigid, lightweight structure. The 97-inch wheelbase provided excellent weight distribution for a front-engine, rear-drive layout. The mounting points were strong enough to handle significant loads. It was almost accidentally perfect for racing. And that's what Grumpy Jenkins discovered. See, when you took an H-body and started modifying it for pro stock, magical things happened. The unibody structure allowed for aggressive acid dipping without compromising rigidity. The short wheelbase created incredible weight transfer on launch. The lightweight construction meant more of your total weight could be engine and drivetrain. Where a Camaro or a Challenger might have 400 pounds of unnecessary body structure, a properly prepared Vega had maybe 200. That's 200 pounds you could add in strategic locations. Forward for traction, low for center of gravity, wherever the physics demanded. But here's what's fascinating from an engineering perspective. When Pontiac introduced the Astre in 1975, they didn't just rebadge a Vega and call it a day. They couldn't. The UAW contracts required different assembly plants, which meant different tooling, which meant small but significant variations. The Astre's body panels were stamped differently. The mounting points had slightly different reinforcement patterns. Even the unibody structure, while dimensionally identical, came from different dies. In production car terms, these differences were meaningless. The cars drove the same, looked the same, cost the same. But in pro stock terms, these differences were unexplored territory. Different stampings might mean different rigidity characteristics. Different reinforcement patterns might mean different weight distribution opportunities. Different assembly plant quality control might mean tighter tolerances in critical areas. Nobody knew, because nobody ever got to find out. But before we get to why the Astre never happened, we need to understand what Pontiac was thinking in 1975. What they saw when they looked at Grumpy's success. And what they thought they could do better. Pontiac's position in 1975. Let me paint you a picture of Pontiac Motor Division in 1975. This isn't some scrappy underdog brand trying to make a name for itself. Pontiac is a cornerstone of General Motors' performance image. They've got history. They've got credibility. They've got swagger. 10 years earlier, Pontiac basically invented the muscle car with the GTO. They dominated NASCAR in the early 60s. Their advertising slogan was literally, "We build excitement." And in 1975, they're still a powerhouse. The Firebird Trans AM is the hottest thing in American performance cars. They're winning in SCCA Trans AM racing. They've got John DeLorean's ghost still haunting the halls, whispering win on Sunday, sell on Monday. But there's a problem. Pro stock. See, pro stock in the mid-70s is the most visible, most marketable form of drag racing. It's heads up. It's production-based. It's fast enough to be exciting but relatable enough to sell cars. And Pontiac isn't there. Oh, they've got some Firebirds running in pro stock. But they're not competitive. They're too heavy, too aerodynamically challenged, too compromised by the platform's Trans AM mission. Meanwhile, their corporate cousin Chevrolet is dominating with a car that Pontiac also builds. Think about how frustrating that must have been for Pontiac's performance division. You're watching your sister brand absolutely humiliate the competition with a platform that sits in your catalog. Same basic car. Same corporate DNA. But all the glory, all the marketing value, all the win on Sunday, sell on Monday benefits are going to Chevrolet. Now, if you're a Pontiac executive in 1975, you're looking at the Astre and you're seeing opportunity. Grumpy has proven the concept. The H-body can dominate pro stock. The formula works. You don't need to invent anything. You just need to execute. Pontiac could build an Astre pro stock program. They could find a talented driver, someone hungry, someone looking for factory backing, someone who could be their Grumpy. They could leverage their engine development expertise to find advantages Chevrolet hadn't explored. They could turn pro stock into a Chevy versus Pontiac war. Corporate siblings battling for supremacy. Imagine the marketing. Imagine the dealer excitement. Imagine the Sunday newspaper ads showing a Pontiac Astre crossing the finish line ahead of Grumpy's Vega. It would have been beautiful. It would have been profitable. It would have been legendary. So why didn't it happen? NHRA's Vega problem. By 1975, the National Hot Rod Association had a serious problem. They'd created pro stock to showcase production-based cars. Real cars that real people could buy. But Bill Jenkins had taken their rulebook, found every loophole, every gray area, every technically legal modification, and built a car that made a mockery of the word stock. The Vega looked stock from 100 feet away. But up close? It was a tube chassis race car wearing a Vega costume. Acid-dipped body panels. Relocated suspension pickup points. A 500 cubic inch big block engine in a car that came with a 140 cubic inch four-cylinder. Technically legal? Actually stock? Not even close. And NHRA was catching hell for it. Other manufacturers were complaining. How is that legal? Mopar guys were protesting. Ford teams were threatening to walk away. The whole premise of pro stock, production cars, minimal modifications, was being exposed as a fiction. But NHRA couldn't just ban the Vega. Because the fans loved it. Grumpy was a folk hero. The Vega's success was perfect David versus Goliath storytelling. Little economy car beating million-dollar factory programs? That's pure American racing romance. Banning it would have been a PR disaster. So instead, NHRA did what sanctioning bodies always do. They changed the rules. 1973, minimum weight adjustments targeting lightweight platforms. 1974, body modification restrictions, specifically limiting acid dipping. 1975. Engine displacement formulas recalculated, conveniently impacting small chassis cars. Every rule change had plausible deniability. We're just ensuring competitive balance. We're protecting the production car spirit of the class. These changes affect all competitors equally. Sure they do. But here's what's crucial to understand. By late 1975, NHRA had spent 3 years trying to contain one H-body program. 3 years of rule changes, 3 years of protests, 3 years of technical bulletins specifically designed to slow down the Vega without actually banning it. And then someone in NHRA's competition department realized something terrifying. Pontiac also built an H-body. Imagine you're NHRA. You finally got the Vega sort of under control. The rules are in place to keep it from completely dominating. The protests have died down. The other manufacturers have stopped threatening to leave. And now Pontiac shows up wanting to homologate an Astre for pro stock. Same platform. Same loopholes. Same potential for dominance. Except now it's not just Grumpy Jenkins in his independent operation. It's Pontiac Motor Division. A major manufacturer. With factory backing. With unlimited engineering resources. With the political muscle to fight every rule change, challenge every technical bulletin, lawyer up on every interpretation. And worse, if Pontiac commits to the Astre, what's to stop Oldsmobile? Buick? What if GM's entire corporate structure decides that H-body pro stockers are the future? NHRA wasn't just looking at one more Vega. They were looking at a potential flood of H-bodies that would make pro stock into GM corporate H-body invitational. That couldn't happen. That wouldn't happen. And NHRA made sure of it. Now, I can't prove there was a specific meeting where NHRA officials said, we need to kill the Astre program. There's no smoking gun document. No leaked memo. No whistleblower testimony. But what I can prove is this. Coincidence? Maybe. But let's keep digging. GM corporate politics. Here's something most people don't understand about General Motors in the 1970s. It wasn't really one company. It was 5 separate kingdoms, Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, and Cadillac, all technically under the same corporate umbrella but functioning as fierce competitors. Each division had its own engineering department, its own manufacturing plants, its own marketing budget, its own profit and loss statement, its own executive leadership with their own bonuses tied to their division's performance. And critically, each division had its own racing budget. Now, this structure worked great in the 1960s when the market was expanding. There was enough pie for everyone. Chevrolet could have muscle cars, Pontiac could have muscle cars, everybody was happy. But by 1975, that pie was shrinking. The muscle car market was collapsing. Insurance costs were through the roof. Emissions regulations were strangling performance engines. Corporate average fuel economy, CAFE, standards were coming. Racing budgets were being scrutinized like never before. So when someone at Pontiac proposed building an Astre Pro Stock program, they weren't just asking for money to go racing. They were asking for money that could have gone to Trans Am racing or NASCAR or production vehicle development or 100 other priorities. And they had to justify it. The conversation probably went something like this. Gentlemen, we want to build an Astre Pro Stocker. But Chevrolet already dominates Pro Stock with the Vega. Exactly. Same platform. We can compete directly. Compete directly with our own corporate cousin for bragging rights in a racing class most people don't watch? What's the ROI on that? And that's the question that killed the Astre program before it started. Return on investment. Building a competitive pro stock program in 1975 wasn't cheap. You needed minimum investment for a serious program, $350,000 to $500,000 per year. And that's in 1975 dollars. In today's money, you're looking at over $2 million annually. Now, what would Pontiac get for that investment? If the Astre won races, they'd get some TV coverage. Maybe some magazine articles. Some bragging rights. Some dealer excitement. But would it sell cars? Here's the brutal truth. The people buying Pontiac Astres in 1975 were not drag racing fans. They were people who wanted a cheap, efficient economy car with a Pontiac badge instead of a Chevy badge. They didn't care about pro stock. They didn't care about NHRA. They probably didn't even know what a quarter mile was. Meanwhile, Pontiac's Trans Am program was actually moving metal. The Firebird Trans Am was a cultural icon. Burt Reynolds was about to make it even more famous in Smokey and the Bandit. That program had clear ROI. That program sold cars. An Astre Pro stock program? That was a vanity project. A racing exercise. A way to compete with Chevrolet for internal bragging rights. And in 1975, with budgets tight and the automotive industry in crisis, vanity projects didn't survive. But even if NHRA had been welcoming, even if GM corporate politics had been favorable, the Astre program had one more massive problem. Timing. See, the Astre didn't debut until the 1975 model year. That means it became available in dealerships in late 1974. The Vega? That debuted in 1971. That's a 4-year head start. 4 years where Grumpy Jenkins was developing his Vega program, learning the chassis, understanding the platform's quirks, building relationships with parts suppliers, creating a knowledge base that took thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars to accumulate. By 1975, Grumpy's Vega was a mature program. He knew what worked and what didn't. He had spare parts inventory. He had proven setups. He had institutional knowledge. An Astre program starting in 1975 would be starting from zero. Now, you might say, but they could just copy what Grumpy did. And you'd be right. Sort of. Yes, the platforms were similar enough that Grumpy's basic approach would translate. But racing at the highest level isn't about copying. It's about optimizing. Finding those last few hundredths of a second. Understanding the subtle differences between good enough and unbeatable. That takes time. And testing. And failures. And iteration. Pontiac would have needed at least 2 years to develop an Astre program to Grumpy's level. 2 years of investment with no guaranteed results. 2 years of playing catch-up while Grumpy continued developing his Vega. And remember, this is all happening while NHRA is actively making rule changes to slow down the H-body platform. So Pontiac's choice was, invest heavily in a platform that arrived 4 years late, that NHRA was actively trying to regulate out of existence, that had questionable ROI, that would compete against their own corporate cousin, in a racing class that was already controversial. Invest that same money in programs that were actually working. Trans Am Racing. NASCAR. Maybe even Top Fuel or Funny Car, where Pontiac engines were proven winners. When you lay it out like that, the decision makes itself. The driver problem. But there's one more obstacle that nobody talks about. Even if Pontiac had overcome the NHRA politics, the corporate budget battles, and the timing issues, there was still one critical missing piece. A driver. See, you can build the best car in the world, but if you don't have a wheelman who can extract its potential, you've got an expensive paperweight. And in 1975, who was going to drive Pontiac's Astre? The best H-body driver in the world was Bill Jenkins. But he was Chevrolet's guy. He had Chevy backing. Chevy sponsorship. His entire brand was built on Chevrolet. He wasn't switching to Pontiac. Bob Glidden was Ford. Don Carlton was Mopar. The Eckman brothers were Chevy. Warren Johnson was just starting out. Pontiac would have needed to find someone hungry. Someone talented but unproven at the highest level. Someone willing to bet their career on an untested platform from a manufacturer with no pro stock history. That's a tough sell. And without a proven driver, without someone who could immediately compete with Grumpy and the other top teams, the whole program becomes even riskier. So add it all up. NHRA opposition plus corporate politics plus bad timing plus no proven driver equals dead program. And that's exactly what happened. The quiet death. The Pontiac Astre Pro stock program didn't die in a dramatic moment. There was no big announcement. No press release. No statement from Pontiac Motor Division explaining their decision. It just faded. Sometime in early 1976, the exact date is lost to history, someone at Pontiac made the final call. The Astre Pro stock program was shelved. The preliminary homologation paperwork that had been started quietly stopped moving forward. The engineers who had been sketching potential modifications went back to their regular jobs. The budgets that had been tentatively allocated were redirected. And the drag racing world barely noticed. Why would they? The Astre had never raced. It had never made a pass. It had never even existed as a completed race car, as far as anyone knew. You can't mourn what you never saw. But here's what kills me about this story. There were people at Pontiac who believed in the Astre. Engineers who had done the math and knew it could work. Marketing people who saw the potential for a Chevy versus Pontiac Pro stock rivalry. Maybe even a driver or two who would have loved the opportunity. And they all had to watch as the program died. Not because it wouldn't work. Not because the car wasn't good enough. But because the politics were too complicated, the timing was too late, and the return on investment was too uncertain. That's not a racing story. That's a tragedy. But you know what's interesting? A few Asters did get built for racing. Not by Pontiac. Not with factory support. But by privateers who saw the same potential that Pontiac's accountants couldn't justify. And what they discovered might surprise you. The privateers who tried. So what is this story really about? On the surface, it's about a car, a Pontiac Astre that could have been a pro-stock legend but wasn't. But dig deeper and it's about something bigger. It's about how sanctioning bodies control innovation through rules and regulations. It's about corporate politics, where companies become their own worst enemies and budget meetings kill dreams. It's about timing, how being 4 years late makes the difference between legendary and forgotten. And it's about ecosystems, because in racing, success isn't just about building the best car. It's about having the support structure that allows greatness to flourish. But most of all, this story is about the narratives we tell ourselves. We like to think racing history is pure meritocracy. The best car wins. The best driver wins. The best engineering wins. But that's not true. It's never been true. Racing history is written by the survivors, by the programs that had the right backing at the right time. The Astre didn't survive, so it didn't get to write its chapter. And here's what should make you angry. We'll never know what the Astre could have been. We'll never know if Pontiac's engineers would have found some advantage Chevrolet missed. We'll never know if a Chevy versus Pontiac rivalry could have pushed both platforms to heights neither achieved alone. All of that potential? Gone. Not because it was impossible, but because it was inconvenient. NHRA found it inconvenient to deal with a second H-body manufacturer. GM found it inconvenient to fund internal competition. The marketplace found it inconvenient to support a platform without Grumpy's name attached. And so innovation died. Potential died. A chapter of racing history that could have been written, wasn't. Somewhere out there right now, there's probably a Pontiac Astre sitting in someone's garage. Maybe it's rusty. Maybe it's forgotten. Maybe the owner doesn't even know what they have. But that car shares DNA with one of the most successful pro-stock platforms in history. That car could have been legendary. It could have been in the winner's circle at Gainesville, Indy, or Pomona. It could have forced NHRA to rewrite their rulebook. It could have made Pontiac a pro-stock powerhouse. Instead, it's a forgotten footnote. Did you know? Trivia answer. A comment on a YouTube video about its more famous cousin. Look, I'm not here to tell you the Pontiac Astre would have changed the world. Maybe it would have been just a footnote anyway. Maybe Grumpy would have crushed it. Maybe NHRA would have regulated it away regardless. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe Pontiac's engineers were brilliant. Maybe they would have found magic in that chassis. Maybe a young, hungry driver would have become the next Grumpy. Maybe pro stock would have been richer, more competitive, more innovative because of the Astre. We'll never know. And that's the tragedy. Not that the Astre failed, but that it never got to try. The next time you watch pro stock, think about all the cars that aren't there. Think about the innovations that got regulated away before they could revolutionize the sport. Think about the engineers whose brilliant ideas died in budget meetings. Think about the drivers who never got the call. And think about the Pontiac Astre. Bill Jenkins' Vega cousin. The car that had everything it needed to be legendary, except permission. Do you think the Pontiac Astre could have been as legendary as the Vega? Or was Pontiac right to walk away? Was this a missed opportunity that could have changed pro stock history? Or was it a smart business decision? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. Especially if you've ever seen a Pontiac Astre pro stocker, if you know someone who built one, or if you have photos or stories of these rare machines. And if you happen to own one, please reach out. I would love to feature your car in a future video. What other forgotten cousins are out there in drag racing history? What other cars had the potential to be legendary but never got the chance? Let me know, because these are the stories I love telling. The ones that got buried. The ones that powerful people would rather you forget. If you're not subscribed to this channel yet, hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell. Because we're just getting started with these deep dives into drag racing's hidden history. Next time, we're looking at an engine combination that was so dominant, so revolutionary, so perfectly engineered that NHRA banned it before it ever made a competitive pass. The builder was a legend. The concept was brilliant. The engine made power that shouldn't have been possible. And the sanctioning body made absolutely sure you'd never see it run. You won't want to miss that one. Thanks for watching Regal Rides. And remember, in racing as in life, history isn't always written by the best. Sometimes it's written by whoever got the chance to write it. The Pontiac Astre never got that chance. But at least now, you know its story.